The gravel cut into my palms when I hit the ground. I remember that detail more clearly than anything else. The sharp bite of my sister's driveway pressing into my skin while my brother-in-law stood over me, still holding the wrench, telling me I'd brought this on myself. My left eye was already swelling shut. I could taste copper in the back of my throat. And somewhere behind him, I could hear my sister's voice, calm as a Sunday morning, saying, "You should have just signed the papers, Olivia." Olivia, that's me. 31 years old, registered physical therapist, 3 years at Mercy Regional, finally had my own apartment after a decade of scrimping. I had a savings account I was proud of, a credit score I'd worked years to build from nothing, and one older sister who had spent most of her life deciding that anything she needed automatically became something I owed her. I want to start before the driveway. I want to start where it actually started. Because if I just tell you about the wrench, you'll think this came out of nowhere. It didn't. Nothing like this ever does. My sister Vanessa is 4 years older than me and has always been the one my parents introduced first at family gatherings. This is Vanessa. She's the one who graduated early. This is Vanessa. She married well. This is Vanessa. She just got the promotion. I was always the second sentence. And this is Olivia, our younger one. Period. No follow-up. I used to tell myself it didn't bother me. I got good at that particular lie. She married her husband, Troy, 6 years ago. Big wedding. Parents paid for most of it. I was maid of honor and spent $4,000 I didn't have on a dress, a flight, and a bachelorette weekend in Scottsdale that Vanessa planned and I was expected to fund. I didn't say a word. That was the dynamic. She needed things, I provided them, and everyone called it family. Troy worked in commercial real estate, or he used to. By the time this whole thing started, he'd been between projects for almost 2 years. Vanessa was still working. She managed a dental office, but their lifestyle hadn't adjusted. They still had the house in the suburbs, still took the vacations, still showed up to Christmas with gifts that were a little too expensive for people with a single income. I noticed but didn't ask. It wasn't my business. That's what I kept telling myself. Last January, Vanessa called me on a Thursday evening. I remember it was Thursday because I had just gotten home from a double shift and I was sitting on my kitchen floor eating leftover rice, straight from the container because I didn't have the energy to find a bowl. She opened with, "How are you? How's work? How's the apartment?" Which meant she wanted something. Vanessa doesn't do check-in calls. I know that now. I knew it then, honestly. But I picked up anyway. She got to the point after about 4 minutes of small talk. She and Troy were trying to refinance their mortgage. Their current rate was brutal and they were drowning, she said. But Troy's credit had taken some hits. She didn't say from what. And they needed a co-signer to get approved. Someone whose credit was clean. Someone the bank would trust. I set down my rice. "We're not asking you to pay anything," she said. "It's just your name on the paperwork. The payments stay with us. You wouldn't even feel it." I asked her what would happen if they couldn't make the payments. She laughed a little. "Olivia, we're not going to miss payments. I know, but what would happen if you did?" She paused. "Then technically the bank could come after you. But that's not going to happen." I told her I needed to think about it. She told me she understood, take all the time I needed, and then she called again the next morning before I'd even had coffee. I did my research. I called my friend who works in mortgage lending. She'd been in the industry for 8 years. She walked me through exactly what co-signing means. It's not a favor. It's a legal agreement that puts your credit, your financial future, and potentially your assets on the line for someone else's debt. If Vanessa and Troy missed payments, it would show up on my credit report immediately. If they defaulted, the bank could sue me. My friend said it plainly. Do not do this unless you are prepared to make those payments yourself every single month, because that's what you're agreeing to. I was not prepared to make a $1,500 monthly mortgage payment. I was a physical therapist renting a 1-bedroom apartment and driving a 2017 Honda. I was comfortable but not wealthy, and one financial catastrophe, a medical bill, a job loss, a car accident, could set me back years. I could not absorb their risk. It wasn't about love, it was just math. I called Vanessa back that Saturday and told her no. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I cannot believe you." I explained everything I'd learned. I told her I wasn't saying they were bad people, or that they'd definitely default. I told her it was just too much risk for my financial situation. I offered alternatives. I asked if their parents had considered co-signing, or if Troy had any family members who might be in a better position. She brushed past every suggestion like I hadn't spoken. "So, you're just not going to help your own family?" she said. I told her I wasn't able to help in this specific way. She hung up. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. The first call from Troy came 3 days later. He didn't yell. Not at first. He was the calm, reasonable version of himself. The one he performed for people he was trying to convince. He explained the situation from his angle, the rate they were locked into, how much they were losing every month, how close they were to turning things around if they could just get refinanced. He said Vanessa was devastated. He said he understood my hesitation but hoped I could see the bigger picture. I told him the same thing I'd told Vanessa. I was sorry, but I couldn't do it. He thanked me for my time. I thought that was it. 2 days after that, my mother called. She'd clearly been breached. She used phrases like, "Vanessa is really struggling," and "family pulls together when it counts." "And you have such a stable situation, Olivia. You could afford to be generous." I asked my mother if she understood what co-signing a mortgage actually meant legally. She said she was sure it would be fine. I said I wasn't. She didn't yell either. She just got quiet in the way she gets quiet when she's disappointed. The way that used to make me agree to things just to make it stop. I was 31 years old and my mother's silence still had that same pull, but I held the line. Then Vanessa texted me a screenshot. It was a picture of a text I had sent her 7 years ago when she was helping me get my first apartment and I didn't have the security deposit. I had asked to borrow $800 and said I would pay her back within 3 months. The message said, "You're the only one I trust to help me with this. I'll make it right, I promise. Family is everything." Beneath the screenshot, Vanessa typed, "Funny how family is only everything when you need something." I stared at that message for a long time. For the record, I paid her back in 6 weeks, not 3. And I'd never once mentioned it again. Never held it over her. Never brought it up when she needed something. But she'd kept the screenshot. She'd held onto it for 7 years like a card she was waiting to play. I didn't respond. The calls stopped for 2 weeks. I thought maybe it was over. I let myself breathe a little. I told my coworker about it during lunch and she said, "Sounds like you handled it right." I almost believed her. Then Troy showed up at my apartment. It was a Wednesday evening, around 7. I had just gotten out of the shower. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole and there he was, standing in the hallway in a collared shirt, hands in his pockets, looking like he was here to discuss something reasonable. I made a mistake. I opened the door. He was calm for the first few minutes. He asked if he could come in. I said no, we could talk in the doorway. He didn't like that. I watched something shift in his face, just slightly, like a gear catching wrong. He told me I was being selfish and short-sighted. He said that all I had to do was sign one document and their entire financial situation would stabilize. He said that my refusal was actively hurting his family, his pregnant wife, he said, and I felt the air change because I didn't know Vanessa was pregnant. She hadn't told me. He was telling me now as a weapon. I said I was sorry to hear about the pregnancy and that I wished them well, but my answer was still no. That's when he stopped being calm. He called me a selfish, ungrateful child. He said I'd always been jealous of Vanessa, always tried to make her feel small, and now I was doing it again. He said he knew people, whatever that meant, people who could make my life difficult in ways I couldn't anticipate. His voice got louder, and I could see my neighbor across the hall open her door a crack. I told him to leave or I would call the police. He left, but he turned around to the stairwell and said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear, "You're going to regret this." I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a while, shaking still in my towel. I called the non-emergency police line and reported the incident. The officer I spoke to was kind. He took a report, gave me a case number, and told me to document any further contact. I wrote everything down that night, the date, the time, what was said, the name of my neighbor who'd witnessed it. My friend who works in mortgage lending told me later that this was the smartest thing I did. I did it because I was scared, not because I was strategic. But it mattered. Vanessa called the next morning. I expected more of the same. What I got was different. She was crying. Not the manipulative crying she does when she wants something. I know the difference after 31 years. This sounded real, exhausted and raw. She said Troy had told her what happened, that he'd come to my apartment without telling her he was going. She said she hadn't known he was going to do that. I told her what he'd said. I told her about the threat. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "He didn't mean it like that." And there it was. That was when I understood that nothing had actually changed. She was calling not to apologize, not to hold him accountable, but to smooth it over. To put the pieces back in the shape she needed them. She needed me to say it was fine, that I understood, that we were good, and then maybe reconsider the mortgage thing while we were at it. I told her I had reported the incident. She went silent. Then she asked why I would do that to her husband. I said I hadn't done anything to her husband. He'd done something to me. She hung up again. 3 weeks passed. I thought maybe the police report had made him back down. I wanted to believe it was over. On a Saturday in March, I drove to my parents' house for my dad's birthday. Vanessa and Troy were supposed to be there. My mother had called me earlier in the week and said it would mean a lot to my father if we could all be in the same room and be civil. I told her I'd try. I didn't want to ruin my dad's birthday. He stays out of most of this. He's a quiet man who loves college basketball and bad jokes and genuinely tries to stay neutral in family conflict, which usually means everyone pressures him to take their side until he agrees to whatever they said last. I arrived at my parents' house and Troy's truck was already in the driveway. My mother greeted me at the door and whispered, "Please just be normal." I told her I intended to be. The first hour was fine. My dad opened cards and we ate my mother's pot roast, and Troy sat at the end of the table being very normal, making jokes about the NCAA tournament, helping clear dishes. I almost relaxed. I watched Vanessa, who was visibly pregnant now, maybe 4 or 5 months, and I felt something complicated looking at her. Love and grief and exhaustion all tangled together. After dinner, my dad went to the living room to watch the game. My mother was in the kitchen. Vanessa excused herself to use the bathroom. That left me and Troy at the dining room table. He waited until we were alone. He slid a folder across the table. "I just need you to look at it," he said. "The actual documents. So you know what you're agreeing to." I didn't touch the folder. I told him I wasn't going to sign anything. I had been clear about this for months. "You're going to look at this?" he said. Not a question. I stood up. I said I was going to help my mother with dishes. He grabbed my wrist. It happened so fast. 1 second I was standing and the next second he was on his feet and he had my wrist and he twisted hard and I heard myself cry out before I even processed the pain. My shoulder wrenched sideways. I heard something pop. I pulled away and stumbled backward into the chair and he was already leaning over me, one hand flat on the table, speaking low and close so no one else in the house could hear. "You're going to sign this," he said, "tonight. Or I will make sure everyone in your life knows exactly what kind of person you are." My shoulder was screaming. I could feel the joint wrong, displaced, the specific nauseating agony of something that's not where it should be. I knew what a dislocated shoulder felt like. I was a physical therapist. I'd treated hundreds of them. And I knew mine was either partially separated or fully out, and that either way, I needed to not move it. I got up. I walked out of the dining room. I went through the kitchen and told my mother I wasn't feeling well and I needed some air. She looked at my face and started to say something, but I was already at the back door. I sat on my parents' back porch and tried to breathe. The cold air in March hit me and I just sat there cradling my arm against my chest, trying to figure out what to do. I could hear the TV from the living room. I could hear my mother clattering around in the kitchen. Everything in the house was normal and I was sitting outside in 40-degree weather with a dislocated shoulder because my brother-in-law had grabbed me at my father's birthday dinner. I called 911. I did it because I was done. I had the police report from the apartment. I had my neighbor as a witness. I had months of documented harassment, and now he had physically hurt me. I was done trying to handle this quietly. I was done protecting the peace. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me. She asked if I was safe, and I said yes, he was still inside the house. She asked if I could stay outside until officers arrived, and I said yes. She asked if I needed an ambulance, and I said yes. I thought my shoulder was dislocated. My mother came to the back door 4 minutes later. She saw me on the phone. She looked at how I was holding my arm. Her face changed. 2 police cars and an ambulance arrived 7 minutes after that. What happened inside the house while I was on the porch? I only know from what my mother told me later. When she heard the sirens, she went back inside and told my father. My father stood up from his chair for the first time all evening and asked Troy directly what had happened. Troy said I had tripped. My father looked at him for a long moment and then went to the front door to let the officers in. My father, the quiet man who loves basketball and stays out of things. He let them in and pointed at Troy. The officers came to me first. A female officer named, I want to say she introduced herself as Officer Reyes. She sat with me on the porch while the paramedics looked at my shoulder. She asked me to tell her everything, from the beginning, and I did. I had the case number from the previous report on my phone. I pulled it up and showed her. She wrote it all down. Troy was detained while they sorted things out. I heard him from around the side of the house, still performing calm, explaining that this was a family misunderstanding, that I'd had a previous report filed out of spite, that his wife could vouch for him. I heard Officer Reyes' partner ask Vanessa directly, did she witness what happened in the dining room? Vanessa said she'd been in the bathroom. She hadn't seen it. That was true, but she knew. I watched her face when she came outside, saw me with the paramedics, saw Troy in handcuffs, and she didn't look shocked. She looked like someone whose plan had failed. Troy was arrested that night. The charge was misdemeanor assault and battery. The shoulder injury was documented by the paramedics. The dislocation confirmed at the ER where my father drove me while my mother stayed at the house. My father barely said anything on the drive. He turned the heat up because I was shivering. When we pulled into the ER parking lot, he turned off the car and just said, I'm sorry, I should have seen this sooner. That was the sentence that broke me open. Not the injury, not the months of harassment. That. My father, who had spent years letting my mother and Vanessa set the temperature of our family, saying I'm sorry. I should have seen this sooner. I cried for the first time that whole night in the ER parking lot. He handed me a napkin from the glove compartment. We sat there for a minute and then we went inside. My shoulder was a partial dislocation. The physician's term is subluxation. It was put back in place, which is as unpleasant as it sounds, and I was sent home with a sling, pain medication, and instructions to follow up with an orthopedic specialist. I was cleared for desk work but not for treating patients for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of income I couldn't fully afford. 2 weeks that I later included in the documentation for the civil case. Troy was released on bail the following morning. Vanessa called me that afternoon. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I listened to it once, saved it, and didn't call back. In the voicemail, she said she knew what he did was wrong and she was dealing with it, and she needed me to understand what was at stake for her and the baby, and she hoped I could find some compassion in my heart for her situation. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say his name. She did not say anything that put the blame where it belonged. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney. I'd retained a family law and civil attorney 2 days after the arrest. My father helped me find her. She was direct and practical and she didn't soften anything. The criminal case was up to the DA's office. But I had a strong civil case for assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and potentially harassment going back to the apartment visit. She also told me that the mortgage request itself, combined with Troy's behavior when I refused, and the discovery that he had shown up to my apartment unannounced, built a compelling pattern. The criminal case moved slowly, the way these things do. Troy ultimately pled guilty to misdemeanor assault. He avoided jail time but received 2 years of probation, mandatory anger management, and a restraining order in my favor. My civil case settled out of court. The amount is part of the agreement, so I won't say the number, but it covered my medical bills, my lost income, my attorney's fees, and then some. My parents did not split down the middle the way I'd always feared they would. That was the thing I wasn't prepared for. My whole life, I'd watched my mother orbit Vanessa like she was the sun. I'd prepared myself for weeks of pressure, for guilt, for being told I was tearing the family apart. What I got instead was my mother showing up to my apartment 6 days after the arrest with a casserole dish and red eyes and saying, I didn't protect you the way I should have. I knew she asked too much of you. I knew it and I didn't say anything. I made her tea. We sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. It wasn't fixed, one casserole doesn't undo 30 years, but it was real. It was the first real conversation my mother and I had ever had where she wasn't managing a version of events. She was just sitting with what was true. My father called Troy's parents. I didn't know he'd done this until later. He called them and told them what their son had done and that he expected them to handle it accordingly. I don't know what was said on the other end of that call. What I know is that Troy's family funded his bail but not his attorney. His parents did not appear at any of the court proceedings. Whatever my father said, it mattered. Vanessa and I have not spoken since the voicemail. I have thought about what I want that relationship to look like. Some days I think about the sister she was when we were kids. She used to do my hair before school because I was bad at it. She stayed on the phone with me the whole night I got a terrifying diagnosis that turned out to be benign. She drove 4 hours to move my furniture when I got my first apartment. She was not always this person. Or maybe she was always partly this person, and I just didn't let myself see it because I needed her to not be. I don't know if we'll get back to something. I'm not ready to decide. My therapist says I don't have to decide right now, and that's probably the most useful thing anyone has said to me in the past year. What I know is this: I signed nothing. I gave up nothing. I lost 2 weeks of work and had a joint put back in place in an emergency room and cried in a parking lot while my father handed me a fast food napkin, and I am still standing. My credit is intact. My savings are intact. My savings are intact. My apartment is mine. My brother-in-law is on probation. My sister is figuring out what her marriage looks like without a husband who can threaten people and walk away. From what I understand, they're still together. I've heard through my mother that they found a different financial path. A private loan from Troy's grandmother, I think. And the house situation got sorted out without my name on anything. It got sorted out without me. That's the part I keep coming back to. It got sorted out. Because it always does. Because the thing about being pressured to sacrifice yourself for someone else's emergency is that their emergency almost never actually requires your sacrifice. They just want you to believe it does. They want you to feel like if you don't hand them your stability, your credit, your future, something catastrophic will happen and it will be your fault. Nothing catastrophic happened because I said no. What happened is they found another way. Like people do, like they would have found regardless, if I'd just held my ground from the start instead of apologizing for it. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist. I have a savings account and a credit score and a 1-bedroom apartment and a sling I don't need anymore. I have a father who handed me a napkin in a parking lot and said I should have seen this sooner. I have a mother who showed up with a casserole and sat with the truth. I have enough. I always did. I've thought a lot about what made Troy think he could grab my arm at my father's birthday dinner and walk away clean. And I don't think it was arrogance exactly. I think it was pattern recognition. He had watched for years what happened when someone said no to Vanessa. They got pressured, they got guilted, they got worn down, and eventually they said yes. That had been the outcome every single time. So when I held the line, he didn't see a boundary, he saw a malfunction. Something to fix. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the injury, not the legal case, not even my sister's voicemail where she asked me to have compassion for her situation without once saying she was sorry. I keep coming back to the years before all of that, the years where I said yes to things I couldn't afford, showed up to things I didn't have the energy for, stayed quiet in conversations where I should have spoken. I wasn't being kind during those years. I was being conflict avoidant, which is a different thing entirely, and I confused the two for a long time. There's a version of me that signs that co-sign your paperwork. She exists. I can see her clearly. She signs it because she's tired of the calls, tired of the guilt, tired of being the difficult one. She signs it telling herself it'll probably be fine, and then 2 years later, or 3, or 5, when Troy misses payments and her credit takes the hit and she calls a bank, trying to understand why she's suddenly a credit risk, she will understand, in a very concrete way, that probably fine is not a financial strategy, that love and liability are not the same thing, that you can care deeply about someone and still refuse to carry their consequences. I didn't sign, and I won't pretend the months that followed were easy because they weren't. But here's what's true: every hard thing that happened to me after I said no came from outside. Troy's anger, Vanessa's manipulation, my mother's silence. Those were external. The one time I was in real danger of losing something permanent was the one moment I almost said yes to protect someone else's comfort at the expense of my own future. People with integrity don't always win in the short term. That's the part no one tells you. Holding the line can cost you a relationship, a holiday dinner, a version of your family you loved. My father handing me a fast food napkin in an ER parking lot is one of the saddest and most clarifying moments of my life. It shouldn't have taken that, And yet it's also true that I would not have that moment, that real, unguarded, finally honest moment with my father, if I had just signed the papers and made everyone comfortable again. Vanessa found another way. She always would have. That's the thing about people who pressure you. They have more options than they show you. They just prefer the one that costs them nothing. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not performing forgiveness either. I'm just 31, sitting in my apartment, credit score intact, shoulder healed, and finally clear about one thing I was fuzzy on for most of my adult life. Protecting yourself is not the same as failing the people you love. Sometimes it's the most honest thing you can do for both of you.